setting Washington's agenda. The Morning Majority, 5 to 9 on 630 WMAL.
It is 8:37. You know, back in the days when I was a Fox News correspondent, if I ever walked into an editorial meeting for special report and I had to talk about the story that I was going to cover that particular day, I always knew that I had to have my facts in a row. I needed to know a lot about the topic because I was going into a meeting where BRIT HUME was going to be sitting, and I can promise you that BRIT HUME knows more about any topic that I was ever going to talk about than I did. Any topic, it doesn't matter. And we're very pleased to have BRIT HUME, a man who I consider a mentor. I'm proud to call him my friend, and a fair and balanced journalist of the highest order. How are you doing, BRIT?
I'm doing well, Brian. Thank you for those kind comments.
Well, I mean them sincerely. Hey, listen, as we look at the debate that's going to happen on another network whose name we shall not mention, out of deference to you, we got to talk about Newt Gingrich. I mean, his whole campaign staff left him last Friday. He says he's starting his campaign anew. I mean, did he ever really have a chance? And can he run this campaign that he's talking about?
I've always thought he was a long shot, made longer now by the stumbles along the way, which culminated in the resignation of so much of his organization. It's possible for someone like Newt Gingrich, who has a lot to say and talks well and can handle himself in debates, to bump along and run a kind of a low-budget campaign where he takes advantage of debates and other opportunities to appear on television and lives off the fat of the land, so to speak, to survive and continue. But it's hard for a candidate like that to turn out a vote, for example, to do the things that organization requires. I also think it'll be difficult for him to raise money. He's always been good at it, but he's always raising money for some larger cause. I think it'll be hard for him to raise money at this point for himself, because I think a lot of savvy Republican donors are they watch this spectacle, what's happened to him, and cannot have been amused.
A lot of the press, Britt, seems pretty antsy about the fact that the field is not set at this point, and new people may enter the race. And what do you think that does to sort of the narratives going forward? It seems like it's a little up in the air instead of being cemented in the public's mind at this point.
Well, people keep talking about how advanced this campaign is and how it's really later than you think. I actually disagree with that. I think this the summer of the year before the presidential year has been referred to as the horse latitudes of American politics, and I think that's as true as it's ever been. And you think about it, except for some stumbles and a few people flirting with getting in or a few people not getting in, we thought nothing much has really happened. Right. Nobody's cast a vote except maybe in a straw poll or two, and those tend not to mean too much. So the shape of the race is likely to remain somewhat unformed for some time to come. And journalists in a hurry to organize things and figure it all out may find all this disagreeable. But I think a wide open race of this kind is going to be interesting. And I think it's, people say, well, the Republicans don't really have a candidate. They don't have anybody who will really lead them against the great campaigner Obama. Whoever, in my view, Mary Catherine, whoever gets through the trials and tribulations of this process, right, and emerges victorious is going to look very different than that person looks now. And the person will have the unmistakable aura of a winner because he or she will have to have done a bunch of winning, and then finally will have won the big prize, been presented at the convention to the public in a way that will be flattering, because that's what conventions are nowadays, and will look very different indeed.
Right, let me ask you about something that's going to come up in the next couple of months, if not weeks, and that is this debt debate. Republicans demanding concessions on spending in exchange for raising the debt ceiling. I get the sense that the worm has turned a little bit. I mean, a few months ago, GOP leadership, I think it was pretty clear that the ceiling would be raised, that they weren't going to mess with any risk of default. But now I get the sense, at least, Britt, that Republicans have kind of dug in, and unless they can't get huge caps on spending, then they're not going to raise the debt ceiling. Am I wrong about that?
No, I don't think you're wrong about that, Brian. First of all, let's be clear about one thing. There really is no risk of default, even if the debt limit were never raised. And what I mean by that is there will always be a stream of revenue coming into the government from withholding of income tax. That stream of revenue will cover about 60% of government spending. The interest on the debt, which was what's in play when you're talking about default, is about 6%. So there'll always be enough revenue to cover that. The only way we could possibly go into default on our debt obligations would be if the Treasury chose to do that. Now, make no mistake about it, if the debt limit isn't ultimately raised, there could be massive disruption of other government functions. But there's no need for there ever to be default. It's something that is talked about, but if you think about it for a minute, you realize how almost inconceivable it is. But at the same time, obviously, it would be an undesirable outcome. There would be massive disruptions. I don't think it would tank the economy, but I think it's something that both sides in the end will have to try to avoid. I do think the Republicans think that, in terms of the popular feeling about this, that they're holding the high cards. Mm-hmm. People don't want the debt limit raised, and the only way they would even countenance it is if it were accompanied by some fairly serious spending cuts. So I think the Republicans are in a strong bargaining position. The problem will come when they get a reasonable compromise, which is what is likely to come out of this. It's going to look like small potatoes to a lot of people on the right. Mm-hmm. And the Republicans risk, some kind of mutiny among the Tea Party portion of their base and some other conservatives as well, because after all, they only control 1/3 of the playing field, so to speak. The rest of it being controlled by the Senate Democrats and the President, the White House. So, there is a limit to what they can do. They can do a lot, but it's still limited.
Hey, BRIT, well, I don't think I've heard you weigh in. If you have, I've just missed it, on the Anthony Weiner affair. What do you make of all that? Should he resign? Should he just go away?
The one thing that strikes me about this is the absence of shame.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the guy, when you look at what the guy did, the mere fact of his exposure, you would think would want him that he'd want to crawl in a hole and never be seen again. And the fact that he's clinging to this office and declining to resign is sort of a sad commentary, I guess, on our times. Now, people who know him well, for example, Kirsten Powers, whom from Fox,
right.
Brian, who's a contributor for us and a columnist for the New York Post, has known him for years, used to go out with him. And I was talking to her yesterday, and she said, that this man lives to be a member of Congress. Lives to be a member of Congress. And without that seat in Congress, his identity is shattered, in her view. And I think she's probably right about that. And so it'll be hard for him to do it. Now he's going to seek treatment. You remember when George Allen got in trouble for his macaca comments?
Yes, very much so.
And do you remember when he said that he discovered during this self-examination over that he was part Jewish? Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
I now fully expect Anthony Weiner to discover that he's not Jewish.
All right, Britt, great to have you on the program. It's wonderful to hear your voice on the radio.
Hey, how's the golf game?
Well, it's the hardest thing in life, golf. Harder than marriage. harder than working. But I'm in there swinging.
All right, hit them straight.
Thanks, Britt.
We'll talk to you soon. BRIT Hume, Fox News analyst here on Morning Majority.